You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. LSU football, by and large, had incredible stability year to year from year one to year two under Brian Kelly. Of course, Jamar Cain left in the middle of spring, and Pete Jenkins was with us last week and talked about Jimmy Lindsey. And Pete Jenkins, of course, legendary defensive line coach who has worked with Jamar Cain at LSU when he came in and consulted a bit. Also knows Jimmy Lindsey and Gerald Chapman, who had filled in kind of as the interim defensive line coach until they made a full-time hire. And Pete Jenkins said, look, he was of the belief, knowing Matt House, that Jimmy Lindsey's actually a better fit for what Matt House wants to do defensively than Jamar Cain was. I mean, Jamar's a great guy and a great defensive line coach. He's with the Broncos now, but LSU might have upgraded there just based on what the defensive coordinator wants. We'll see how it all plays out, but it was an interesting thought. And then obviously we saw after spring that Brian Polian, who had been moved from his special teams coordinator role to the off-field GM role, was leaving to become the athletic director at his alma mater. And there was a lot of prodding and joking about Brian Polian leaving. Some just assumed that this was a supply way of them firing him, saying, go find a new job. And I kind of push back against that a little bit. There is, again, just to reiterate, there is no argument to be made for Brian Polian to have remained on staff as special teams coordinator. They were atrocious. We look at all of the metrics, all of the stats, everything. There's that. FPI does that efficiency rating. Pro Football Focus for the college does their efficiency metrics as well. And when you combine all of your efficiencies in all the special teams units, and LSU was 125th in the country last year in special teams efficiency. They were awful. There was no explanation. So I am not now, nor would I ever argue for Brian Polian in that role. They needed to replace him, and ultimately they did. We'll see if the path they're taking will work. But they kept Brian Polian in a general manager role. And some people just assume that was just sort of like, I'll give you an example. When Joe Alleva got fired at LSU, and he was fired at LSU, because they were still paying him, they kept him as like an emeritus role, like a fundraiser or whatever. Joe Alleva's worst attribute, and he had a lot of bad attributes. One of his worst attributes was he couldn't raise money. He was so disliked that they couldn't fundraise around Joe Alleva. So keeping him on as a fundraiser was just laughable. It's like, hey, we're paying you this money anyway. Instead of saying we're firing you, you kind of get ahead of the resume a little bit. We'll pay you. You'll be an emeritus role or whatever, and you'll just go out to pasture, go sunbathe out at his house at U Club like he used to do before he moved to Florida. You could tell my disdain for Joe Alleva. He was absolutely horrendous at his job. But this wasn't the case with Brian Polian. Brian Polian had been with Brian Kelly. And that general manager role is one that Brian Kelly very much counts on. And when we talk about Polian having also been in the in the recruiting coordinator role, that doesn't necessarily mean you're an awesome in-home recruiter or anything, but so much of that is just organizing the board and strategies and all, making sure you have roster management. Are you attacking the portal, freshmen? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot that goes into that as far as managing the roster and delegating those responsibilities. And Brian Kelly very clearly trusted Brian Polian and put him in that role. Now, I don't mean to rehash the whole Brian Polian conversation. I only bring this up because Brian Kelly has been doing the media rounds, right? He did an interview with Jacques Doucet, did an interview with Michael Cobble, our buddy from WBRZ. He was on the morning show with Hester and T-Bob here. He's bounced around a bunch, and he visited with Collada here recently. I don't think they've released the full thing, but this clip has been posted, and it was about finding a replacement for Polian in the GM role.
And we're happy for Brian. He gets a chance to go back to his alma mater. I mean, that's a great opportunity for him. But this is a strategic position because it really, when you talk about it, it's somebody that knows football, right? And has to have a football background, but also strategy, right?
If you were just creating a fake position, this was just a made-up role just to keep somebody on staff, you wouldn't then replace that role when that person was gone. So very clearly, Brian Kelly, and the fact that they are moving to replace Brian Polian and to bring in a new general manager, like he said, you got to know football, but it's also strategy. And then you're also talking about all the organization of college recruiting, everything from like managing your board and like what positions do you need. Again, we can look back almost a decade. Remember, Austin Thomas was hired at LSU. He was on staff under Les from 2013 through 2015 when Les was fired and Ed Ogeron was hired. In 2016, Ed Ogeron promoted Austin Thomas to that general manager role, kind of created and named it general manager. Now Austin left and came back and is now at Ole Miss, but it's not new is my point. I mean, Austin Thomas filled that role here in 2016, and a lot of schools do that now. But roster management is so important. And I know we harp on this so much, but just think about where LSU is right now at safety. They're still pursuing Andre Sam, the transfer who's was at McNeese and then Marshall and transferred this offseason to Tulane, and now before he's even played Tulane, he's back in the portal and deciding between apparently Miami or LSU. They're still pursuing a safety because they had a giant hole there. There were misses in the recruiting process. Brian Kelly was just trying to plug holes last year, so he went after some transfers, and it worked. I mean, Joe Fouché was a great Band-Aid a year ago, but it was a one-year fix, and you have some young dudes that you're trying to step up into that role, and they still need more depth and experience at that position. Running back is another great example. It's so odd that in this state, in Louisiana, where I can look back 20 years, go back to Kevin Falk, and you can roll through from Kevin Falk and Rondell Mealy to LeBrandon Toefield and Ali Broussard and Justin Vincent and Joseph Adai. I mean, you can Chiron Carey. I mean, you can go all down the list. Hester and Keelan and Charles Scott. I mean, you could go through Kenny Hilliard and then Richard Murphy and Jeremy Hill. I'm leaving dudes off. Michael Ford, Fournette, Geis, Clyde. I mean, all the running backs from this state that LSU just boom, 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 to get to a spot where you've gone 3 years without a real bell cow running back is just, it's inexcusable. But that's kind of the way that they sort of mishandled the roster before Brian Kelly got here. So he tried to supplement last year, of course. He went and got Noah Cain out of the transfer portal, signed 2 freshman running backs, and now they've added Logan Diggs as well. Again, they're building the numbers. Look at tight end. I mean, you literally had no time. I mean, you had like 1.5 tight ends last year. I mean, now you're looking at, you've got Mason Taylor coming back, and you're excited about that. But after that, it's a whole bunch of freshmen because you mismanaged that position previously, with the previous staff. And so you have these holes. And it's like, that's not just that's not just symptomatic of Ogeron. It became a problem, which is ultimately why it went the way it did. But even look back to 2015. Remember, Les Miles back in 2015 had more scholarship kickers and punters than he did linebackers. I mean, it was crazy. He said that they had 6 kickers and punters on scholarship, and they had, I think, 5 linebackers. So it sometimes pops up as a problem, but it's why this position matters so much. It's why you have to have somebody that's constantly looking at your roster, constantly looking at the transfer portal, constantly looking at the recruiting board, and having a plan A, B, C. So if you get this guy, great, but if not, what's our plan B, C to make sure that we have an option at those spots so you don't end up with more place kickers than linebackers on your roster. You don't end up with 5 running backs and none of them are worthy of getting 100 carries in a season. That's the problem you have to avoid. And that's why you have to have someone managing that. Brian Kelly knows it, and that's why he's going to replace Brian Polian. It wasn't I'll maintain this, it was never just a placeholder job for Brian Polian. It wasn't just hey, I'm doing my friend a solid, we're already paying him, so just carve out some role for him. No, he valued Brian Polian's opinion and strategy and football and talent evaluation and all that stuff. And Brian Polian's a guy who's in his late 40s and has a family and was tired of living a transient life and had an opportunity to set roots and go back to his alma mater. So he's doing that, and you can't fault the guy for it. But for LSU, replacing that position is going to be important, and Brian Kelly said as much. And they are looking to quickly replace Brian Polian at a different GM in that spot. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.